At the beginning of this story, I am shown a ship sailing through the South Atlantic Ocean towards a remote island. On this ship, there is a weather officer named David. The government has sent him to the island to observe the weather for 1 year, so he can collect data on unusual weather changes. He has been provided with a year's worth of food and all necessary supplies. After several days of travel, the ship finally reaches the island. After that, David and the captain disembark with a small boat to carry out essential tasks. They disembark on the remote island. There stands an ancient lighthouse and a modest dwelling where David is expected to reside. Prior to David's arrival, there was another weather officer named Robert who had been stationed there, but his assignment has concluded. Upon David's arrival at the dwelling where he is meant to reside, he is taken aback. The house is utterly disorganized, as though some event had transpired there. Everything is strewn about. They speculate that Robert might be located in the lighthouse, so David and the captain proceed in that direction. However, the lighthouse, it is encircled by pointed wooden stakes, as though someone deliberately barricaded it. When they repeatedly knock on the gate, they receive no reply, so they somehow manage to enter the lighthouse. As they ascend the stairs, they discover a man asleep, whose name is Gruner. When they inquire about Robert, Gruner mentions that he might have succumbed to some illness. When the captain questions him about the deceased body, Gruner provides an odd response. He suggests that perhaps someone killed and consumed him. David and the captain are both surprised. It seems that Gruner's mental state is not well. The captain tells David that if he wants, he can go back with him, but David needs money, and if he can provide the government with accurate weather reports, it could lead to a good reputation, so he decides to stay there. As the captain leaves, he gives David a gun, saying that perhaps this place is not as safe as it seems. After the captain departs, David tidies up the place a bit and makes it livable. During this time, he finds a diary of the former officer. An old officer's diary is found, containing some entries related to 1913. The diary had sketches of some strange creatures. David doesn't understand why he would have made these. There is also a photo of his wife in the diary. The next morning, David starts his work, but when he reaches the seashore, he sees some stones and seashells arranged in a strange pattern. I think maybe Gruner did all this. During work, when David looks towards the lighthouse through binoculars, he sees another man with Gruner. I think it might just be his imagination, so he doesn't pay much attention to it. Subsequently, night descends. David is deeply engrossed in his work when he hears a knock on the door. He initially thinks it might be Gruner, but upon calling out Gruner's name, there is no response. As he cautiously advances with a lamp in hand, he begins to hear peculiar noises. He observes a creature attempting to force its hand through beneath the gate. Its hand is distinctly not human. He becomes extremely frightened and hastily runs towards the basement. After a brief period, the terrifying creature makes its way into the house and begins searching for David. At that very moment, David notices it peering through a narrow crack in the basement. David quickly grabs a knife, and as soon as its eyes become visible, he stabs it directly in the eyes, causing the creature to scream loudly and flee. Following this, David securely shuts the basement gate and spends the entire night wide awake there. The next morning, when he cautiously emerges from the basement, he observes peculiar markings on the sand that appear distinctly inhuman, leading directly into the sea. David fully comprehends the reason Gruner had positioned sharp stakes around the lighthouse. Indeed, Gruner had done so to safeguard against horrifying creatures. He senses that this dwelling is no longer secure for him. Overcome with fear, he dashes towards the lighthouse and urgently calls out to Gruner to open the door and allow him entry, but Gruner explicitly declines and instructs him to return with the ship. David experiences considerable disappointment and retreats from that location. He comes to the realization that if he desires to remain alive, he must thoroughly fortify this house. He boards up all the windows with wooden planks and constructs a barricade of sharp wooden stakes all around the perimeter. Additionally, he arranges old papers and books outside the gate, intending to sprinkle oil on them and ignite them if necessary to frighten away the creatures. There exists a truth that David has not yet become aware of, and he is destined to uncover it this very night. He discovers an ancient box within the house, which contains a firearm and numerous bullets. Observing this provides him with a slight sense of courage, yet he remains significantly fearful. As the sun commences its descent, David silently positions himself in a corner of the house, clutching the gun in his hand. His heart begins to race rapidly, and he perceives peculiar sounds emanating from the wind outside. As he approaches the window, he is utterly taken aback. Not merely a single creature, but a multitude of bizarre entities are observed emerging from the water, all making their way towards his residence. Within mere moments, they commence their attempts to breach the gate. David starts discharging bullets, causing a few of the creatures to fall, yet the remainder grow increasingly aggressive. As the situation deteriorates, he ignites the papers and books. Witnessing the flames, the creatures become frightened and retreat back into the sea. Proceeds cautiously towards the lighthouse, seeking shelter. The wooden structure of his former residence had ignited rapidly, leaving him with no choice but to escape. Enveloped in a protective sheet, David had dashed through the gate, finding refuge behind a substantial rock adjacent to the lighthouse. Although his home was severely charred, the fortunate arrival of rain helped to gradually extinguish the flames. By the time morning arrived, the house had been completely reduced to ashes. Now, in need of a new place to reside, David takes hold of his rifle and moves cautiously towards the lighthouse, hoping to find shelter there. He starts moving towards the house. He crouches behind a rock outside the lighthouse, and as Gruner goes out to fetch water, he quietly follows him. In fact, David wants to take Gruner at gunpoint to have a place to stay with him. David is waiting for Gruner when suddenly a creature attacks him from behind. Gruner quickly comes and stops it, telling David that it's his pet creature. David tells him that if he wants to stay alive, he must give him refuge in the lighthouse. He says he has a year's worth of food and plenty of gunpowder. If Gruner lets him stay in the lighthouse, they can share with each other. After thinking for a while, Gruner agrees. They both take the remaining food and reach the lighthouse. The next morning, when David awakens, he discovers the female creature gently licking his wounds, and after some time, his hand is nearly healed. Observing this, David is utterly astonished. At the top of the lighthouse, David observes Gruner meticulously counting bullets, with the creature assisting him. Now, David feels reassured that this creature will not pose any threat to him. It is not dangerous to him. Now, he desires to learn everything about it from Gruner, and wishes to unveil the truth about this creature to the world, as they will get a name. But Gruner absolutely does not want that. Gruner believes that in society, everyone is a slave to someone, but on the island, he considers himself a king. He has even written it in several places. Gruner is the king. In fact, the female creature once accidentally got caught in Gruner's fishing trap. She was small then, and Gruner saved her life. Since then, she has stayed with him and obeys his every command. However, Gruner is a short-tempered person. He never treats the creature with humanity. He continuously maintains a physical relationship with her and tortures her. Once, she even attacked Gruner, but he punished her in such a way that she began to see herself as his servant. Perhaps this is why the sea creatures come to take her every night. They can never attack during the day, they always attack at night. David doesn't want to stay here anymore. He desires to send a signal so that he can depart from this location. However, Gruner mentions that no vessel ever arrives here. David simply wants to escape from this place at any cost. He is beginning to feel increasingly suffocated here. He is determined to leave no matter what. As the evening gradually approaches, Gruner instructs David to prepare with the firearm because those creatures will likely come again. The two of them begin activating the lighthouse light, and before long, a substantial number of those creatures start emerging from the sea. He continues firing at the creatures, but David, overwhelmed by fear, retreats to a corner within the lighthouse. Gruner repeatedly calls out to him, yet David remains unresponsive and eventually loses consciousness right there. Gruner battles the creatures by himself throughout the entire night. In anger, he picks David up and says that if he wants to stay here, he must follow everything I say. Now David has to fetch water daily, do small chores around the lighthouse, and reluctantly take on guard duty at night because if David wants to survive, he has to do all this. However, one thing he absolutely dislikes is how Gruner tortures the female creature in new ways every day. David understands that someone who has been living alone on a deserted island for years might lose their mind. Perhaps that is the reason Gruner has ended up in such a state. Now David must comply with everything Gruner commands. Once more night descends and both prepare for their guard duty. As usual, the terrifying creatures emerge from the depths of the sea. However, tonight is different. This time David is not afraid. He courageously confronts them, but Gruner does nothing. He leaves David alone outside and closes the lighthouse door himself. Sir, he desires for David to acquire knowledge independently. If he wishes to endure, he must battle alone. David continuously shouts for assistance, yet Gruner refrains from opening the door. Somehow, David manages to combat the creatures throughout the entire night. When Gruner eventually opens the door, he observes David sitting outside the lighthouse, severely injured, but his fear has vanished. This is how his time progresses. At night, he confronts the creatures, and during the day, he labors at the lighthouse. This identity is now an open journey for David. Every single day, he ponders when he will finally attain liberation from this location and when everything will conclude. In the meantime, David initiates the development of a distinctive connection with the female creature. He starts to feel sympathy for her. He now comprehends how overpowering solitude can be. Perhaps the creature experiences the same sentiment. David gives her the name Andreas. Over time, David and Gruner observe that the assaults from the creatures are diminishing. Perhaps in the winter they go somewhere else. By now they might have realized that attacking here is pointless. But Gruner says that's not the case. They will definitely return. They are reproducing themselves, increasing their numbers. Now a few more days pass where one night after dinner they are playing chess. They get so engrossed in the game that they forget to turn on the lighthouse light, and taking advantage of the darkness, the creatures suddenly attack them. David sees if they have become even more aggressive than before and if their numbers have increased significantly. Now even two people together can't hold them off for long. They are quite capable, and the ammunition is almost completely depleted. Somehow, they both manage to ascend to the very top of the lighthouse, but during this, Gruner sustains a severe injury on his leg. Now, they have no escape route whatsoever. They have utterly surrendered. They sense that these creatures are about to annihilate them, but then unexpectedly dawn arrives. Sunlight spreads, and all the creatures retreat to the sea. NRS attempts to treat Gruner's injury. However, at this moment, David comprehends that they are unable to triumph in this battle. They lack both ammunition for their protection and sustenance to consume. The following day, while David is exploring outside, he spots a vessel on the horizon. He hurriedly goes inside and retrieves the flare gun. Just as he is about to signal the ship, Captain Gruner intervenes to prevent him because he doesn't wish for David to depart. In the meantime, NRS assaults Gruner in an effort to rescue David. Actually, Gruner has fallen in love with Selene. This has become his own world where he lives like a king, and NRS is his offering. He doesn't want to return to the city's crowd, and now David has also become his only companion, someone he doesn't want to lose. The ship slowly disappears into the sea, and David can't do anything about it. As the days go by, Gruner continues to behave badly with Banerjee and David, but it's NRS who has to endure the most torture. David doesn't like any of this. It doesn't feel right. One day, David gifts NRS a small toy boat that he made from whale bones. Seeing the boat, NRS takes David to a corner of the colony. There, a real boat was hidden. When David asks about the Bruners, she says that yes, she knows about it. A few months ago, a regular smuggling ship sank in a storm. Some people managed to reach the island, but before morning, the creatures attacked them, and they were all killed. Hearing this, an idea comes to David's mind. They have a dive. It was something like that. If they could reach the sunken ship in the sea, they might find bullets or dynamite. Hussein's battle with the creatures might become easier, but Gruner refuses to help. A few more days pass, and now a deep connection has formed between David and Anarius. David now feels genuine sympathy and affection for her. Gruner observes all this and for the first time considers that perhaps he should help David. The reality is that Gruner's intentions are quite different from what they seem. The scheme is for David to venture into the ocean, retrieve boxes of dynamite, and then leave them behind so that the creatures eliminate him. In this manner, the dynamite will remain with Gruner, and NRS will once again become his subordinate. They both arrive at the ocean. David dons a diving suit and descends into the depths of the water. Beneath the ocean, the ship was utterly wrecked, but fortunately, they discover some boxes of dynamite, and unexpectedly, the perilous teacher emerges before them. David becomes terrified when he observes them and tumbles down. Wearing the cumbersome iron suit, he finds himself unable to move. David struggles to manage himself beneath the water's surface. His diving suit is exceedingly heavy. Furthermore, he is unable to signal Gruner. Gruner assumes that perhaps David has perished, but in truth, what David encountered were merely the small offspring of the creatures, which pose no threat to him. David generates pressure underwater and abandons his heavy suit there. He swims back to the water's surface. He discovers some aged boxes submerged underwater that contain dynamite. In the event of another attack, all the creatures could potentially be eliminated at once. Several months pass by, and snow starts to fall. Surprisingly, the attacks have ceased, and their primary responsibility now is merely to operate the lighthouse and maintain vigilance. Gruner suspects that perhaps NRS has informed the creatures about the dynamite scheme. That's precisely the reason they are refraining from attacking at this moment. Contemplating this, he becomes extremely furious and begins to assault NRS severely, but David steps in and halts him. Following this incident, they both devise an alternative plan. This time, they decide to leave the primary entrance of the lighthouse open so that when the creatures venture inside, they can be eradicated using dynamite, and events unfold as they had strategized. As night descends, numerous creatures emerge from the sea, and as soon as they enter, they launch an attack on David. David valiantly fights back. As soon as the creatures reach the lighthouse, Roner presses the dynamite lever, but the blast doesn't happen. The connection had remained open, which David hadn't connected. David quickly runs upstairs and fixes the connection. In this way, Groner tries to stop the creatures alone, and as soon as the connection is made, the initial blast occurs, killing many creatures. However, some creatures are still ready to attack, and even though he doesn't want to, Groner has to detonate the second layer as well. The explosion is so intense that both of them pass out, and when they regain consciousness in the morning, they find the bodies of dead creatures scattered all around. NRS is nowhere to be seen, and Roner is still killing the remaining live creatures. Then David notices a necklace caught in the neck of an injured creature, and upon seeing this, he realizes the magnitude of the mistake they have made. In fact, David thinks that these creatures were not as bad as they had assumed. Perhaps they were family-oriented creatures like them, just unable to speak the human language, only wanting to keep their children and group safe. They couldn't speak the present language, they just wanted to keep their children and group safe. David was filling up. From the sea, a creative sound began to be heard, and he realized that he had taken the lives of many seasons, simply because they were not understood. One day, he saw some small childlike creatures on the shore who perhaps were now orphaned. David made a circle of stones and placed the same toy pot in the middle that Nari had given him, hoping she would return, but she never did. One morning, David saw that Gruner was lying unconscious. He had some old things with him, including a photograph. David observed her and was utterly astonished. She was the very same woman whose photograph he had initially seen in Gruner's diary. Indeed, she was his wife, and at that moment, David realized that Gruner's true name was Robert, and he had also once been a weather officer. However, isolation and the demise of his wife had mentally shattered him. Despite everything, he still refused to leave the island. One day, David noticed that the boat he had positioned in the circle was no longer present. But in that same place, a small creature is left standing, holding the same toy that David had placed in the circle. This was to show that now his approach was only of friendship. After a while, NRS emerges from the sea, followed by an army of creatures. However, this time, no one attacks because they all seek peace now. Gruner comes out of the lighthouse trying to stop the conflict and says that they don't want this, but Gruner doesn't listen to anyone. He yells at NRS to go inside. She is no longer merely his servant. Now she stands resolutely as a mother fiercely safeguarding her offspring. Gruner cannot bear the fact that no one listens to him anymore. In a fit of uncontrollable rage, he strides purposefully toward the lighthouse and kills a small creature with a flare gun. Everyone flees in terror, and NRS departs as well. This infuriates David immensely. He assaults and severely beats David. David inquires about the reason behind his actions, but the guru pays no attention to him. He has utterly lost his sanity, yet David softly calls him by his actual name. He utters, Robert, and upon hearing this, Gruner halts. He then becomes aware of his genuine identity, his former life, his spouse, and his errors. He was never inherently a bad individual. Circumstances and isolation had transformed him into one. That is why he steps outside and submits himself to the creatures to allow them to end his life. David secures himself within the confines of the lighthouse. As the days gradually turn into months, a full year later, a governmental team arrives at the location accompanied by a newly appointed weather officer. However, there is an additional twist in the narrative because David remains unwilling to depart from Silent. In the meantime, NRS has been liberated and is with her family. Now everyone is able to reside peacefully on Silent, which is precisely why David is also reluctant to leave it. What do you think about why David didn't leave Salem? Please let me know in the comments below because I read your comments and thank you very much for your lovely comments.